My friends, hold your center, not because the world has grown softer, not because life has finally decided to cooperate, but because you have uncovered something far more extraordinary than the instinct to react. You have uncovered the truth that your internal state is the actual seat of power, and that nothing beyond you carries any influence unless you hand it that influence yourself. The instant you grasp this, everything around you begins to shift in ways that feel both astonishing and oddly natural. Most people live under the assumption that peace comes after things improve. They wait for the confirmation, the proof, the solid ground beneath their feet before they allow themselves to exhale. But here is the deeper reality. Improvement follows the exhale. Life reorganizes itself the moment you stop requiring it to be different before you relax. You enter a posture of quiet authority. You no longer run toward results. Results begin moving toward you. Being unbothered is not the same as being cold or disconnected. It means you are rooted. It means your tranquility has become non-negotiable. It means your responses are no longer automatic downloads from old conditioning. You start operating from a place of settled confidence rather than emotional impulse. And when that shift occurs, the world adjusts around you. Every disruption you face is not produced by the event itself, but by the interpretation you layer on top of it. Two individuals can encounter the same exact situation, and one fractures while the other holds firm. That difference is not a matter of strength, intellect, or fortune. It is a matter of assumption. One person assumes the situation controls them. The other assumes they are the source from which all authority originates. When you remain unbothered, you are silently issuing a statement. This does not define me. This does not determine where I end up. This does not reach my inner knowing. That statement requires no words. It is transmitted through feeling, and what is felt leaves its impression upon reality. Life answers to emotional authority, not emotional noise. The more absolute your inner stillness, the more swiftly things fall into place. Most people spend their days emotionally bargaining with the world. They become distressed so they will be noticed. They worry so they will feel ready. They react so they will feel in command. But all of that effort actually locks in the belief that life is something that happens to them rather than something that moves through them. The unbothered person understands something entirely different. They understand that attention creates, that emotion is a directive, that sustained inner postures become lived experience. So they govern what they feel, not through suppression, but through intentional direction. When something unexpected arrives, they do not sprint toward interpretation. They pause. They hold inner neutrality. They refuse to assign meaning prematurely. And inside that pause, reality begins to reshape itself. This is the birthplace of miracles, not in desperation, not in force, but in composure. A miracle is simply what happens when a shift in assumption collapses the distance between where you are and what you want. It is what emerges when you stop demanding proof and begin inhabiting knowing. When you remain unbothered, you are no longer fighting the present moment. You are no longer pouring emotional energy into what you do not want. You are quietly inhabiting the state of one who is already complete. And the world, which cannot help but mirror what it receives, reorganizes itself accordingly. Consider how frequently reaction delays what we most want. Anxiety locks things in place. Overthinking keeps doors sealed. Emotional turbulence traps us inside repetitive cycles. But steady expectation moves things with ease. Quiet confidence invites what we need. Inner neutrality dissolves what stood in the way. Staying unbothered is not passive. It is the most rigorous form of inner practice. It demands that you trust what you have assumed inwardly more than what your senses report outwardly. It requires you to believe that what you have accepted inside yourself is already set in motion, regardless of what today's evidence suggests. This is precisely why those who remain composed tend to receive sudden, unexpected breakthroughs. Opportunities surface without effort. People shift without confrontation. Problems dissolve without logical explanation. From the outside, it looks like fortune. From the inside, it simply feels like the natural result of something that was already underway. Because once you stop fueling the old narrative with reaction, the old narrative loses its power. The world is perpetually reflecting your interior conversations. When your inner dialogue moves from "why is this against me" to "this is already working," you alter the direction of that reflection. When you stop emotionally wrestling with your circumstances, you withdraw the fuel that keeps them alive. What is no longer energized cannot sustain itself. Being unbothered means you no longer panic during quiet stretches. You no longer spiral when progress is invisible. You understand that unseen movement is still movement. Roots deepen in silence. Seeds crack open in darkness. The most significant transformations occur long before anyone can observe them. So you hold steady. You do not reach for signs. You do not repeatedly ask when. You do not rehearse scenarios of failure. You assume completion, and you inhabit that assumption right now. This is where miracles accelerate, when your internal world no longer contradicts what you desire. Most people unknowingly undo their own intentions by reacting to temporary conditions. They affirm clarity, but internally rehearse confusion. They picture success, but answer every delay with frustration. The unbothered individual does not do this. They understand that consistency of inner state outweighs intensity of outer effort. They choose calm again and again and again. They choose faith repeatedly. They choose inner stillness even when emotion attempts to pull them away. And because of that consistency, reality settles around them. When you remain unbothered, the way people engage with you begins to shift. Exchanges change in quality. Respect deepens without you demanding it. Tension disperses without confrontation. This does not happen because you insisted on it. It happens because your internal state quietly communicates authority. Composure is magnetic. Calm is persuasive. The world responds to what you are being, not to what you are requesting. Miracles often arrive wearing the clothing of ordinary events. A conversation you almost did not have opens an unexpected path. A delay protects you from something worse. A closed door steers you somewhere better. The unbothered individual does not chalk these up to coincidence. They recognize them as confirmation. Because when you are no longer emotionally desperate, perception clears, and you can finally see what was already there. Being unbothered also means releasing your grip on how outcomes must arrive. The need to control is born in fear. Trust is born in knowing. When you trust what you have accepted inwardly, you give life the room to surprise you. And life reserves its greatest surprises for those who do not micromanage its methods. This does not mean inaction. It means your action arises from alignment rather than anxiety. You move when it feels right, not when fear is pushing. You speak from your center, not from reactivity. Your actions become economical and well-timed, and effort begins to diminish while results expand. This is the paradox. The less you emotionally interfere, the faster things resolve. The more inwardly settled you remain, the more fluidly the external world rearranges itself. Miracles are not violations of natural law. They are expressions of a higher order of law, one that responds to assumption rather than force, to consciousness rather than strain. When you remain unbothered, you are no longer being shaped by the world. You are shaping it. You stop asking, "What if this fails?" and begin living as though it has already succeeded. Not loudly, not with performance, but quietly, naturally, with an ease that becomes your signature. And that ease becomes the instruction reality follows. There will be moments when the habit of reaction tries to reclaim you, when the mind wants to analyze everything apart, when emotions begin to build pressure. In those moments, you do not wage war against yourself. You simply come back to center. You recall what you know. You remind yourself that nothing external can reach your inner knowing without your permission. Each time you choose stillness, you build its foundation stronger. Over time, being unbothered stops being a practice and becomes your nature. Problems no longer feel personal. Delays no longer feel like verdicts. Difficulties no longer feel permanent. You understand that everything in the outer world is temporary, but the internal state you inhabit is yours to choose. So you choose completion. You choose fulfillment. You walk as though supported. You speak as though your voice matters. You decide as though you are guided. You rest as though your foundation is secure. And life, faithfully mirroring your assumption, continues to confirm it. This is the real miracle. Not that circumstances change, but that they change precisely because you did not waver. When you remain unmoved, life moves on your behalf. When you stay unbothered, reality reorganizes itself around the quiet authority you carry. You trust the unseen. The visible must follow. And at some point, looking back, you will see that the moment everything turned was not when you tried harder. It was the moment you finally settled into knowing. Even now, as these words reach you, something inside already recognizes this as true. Not as a concept, not as motivation, but as something remembered. There is a deep familiarity in the idea of remaining unbothered, as though some part of you has always known that peace was never a reward waiting at the finish line, but a condition you could claim the moment your awareness became clear enough. Because when you stop fighting with life, life stops fighting with you. Most disturbances are not warnings, they are examinations of assumption. They appear to determine whether you will return to the old identity that flinches, doubts, and resists, or whether you will hold steady in the state you have deliberately chosen. Each moment extends this invitation. And each time you accept calm over chaos, you cement a new self-concept, one that does not buckle under pressure. When you hold your composure through uncertainty, you are not denying reality. You are redefining it. You are declaring that your inner world is the reference point, not the fluctuations happening around you. And reality, which is obedient to whatever reference point you establish, must recalibrate itself accordingly. This is why emotional mastery is not about suppression, but about selection. You choose which thoughts deserve your belief. You choose which emotions deserve your focus. You choose which interpretations deserve your energy. And what you consistently select becomes automatic. Eventually, you no longer need to remind yourself to stay composed. Composure simply becomes what you are. When calm becomes identity, urgency loses its grip. Fear becomes a guest that visits briefly and leaves. Impatience fades because you are no longer standing apart from what you want. You are living from its fulfillment already, on the inside, and the external world is simply catching up. Notice how differently life moves when you stop watching it with a nervous eye, when you stop auditing it for confirmation, when you release the need to measure progress by the hour. In that open space, things tend to shift with unexpected speed. People respond more warmly. Situations loosen. Openings appear. Not because you forced them, but because you allowed them. The unbothered state carries an assumption of inevitability, a quiet certainty that says, "This is already complete. I require no proof." And that certainty carries weight precisely because it is relaxed. It does not grip. It does not demand. It simply rests in knowing. Strain creates delay. Relaxation accelerates. This is why forced optimism falls flat, while quiet conviction consistently delivers. The world does not answer to affirmations spoken through clenched teeth. It answers to deep knowing felt in stillness. When you are genuinely unbothered, there is no inner argument remaining. And without inner argument, outer resistance collapses on its own. There will be moments when events appear to contradict your inner assumption. In those moments, the previous version of you would have panicked, dissected every detail, or thrown yourself back into emotional chaos. But now you understand that contradiction is not denial. It is transition. Reality must rearrange its pieces before the new picture becomes clear. And rearrangement can look turbulent before it looks like transformation. So you hold your position. You understand that the bridge between here and there is not always comfortable, but it is always moving you forward. And you do not need to see the full structure before you take the next step. You only need to remain loyal to the state you have chosen. Being unbothered means you stop taking appearances personally. You stop reading delay as rejection. You stop interpreting silence as evidence of failure. You understand that life does not require your emotional supervision to function. It knows precisely what it is doing when you stop interrupting it. So you allow people to be who they are without carrying their energy inside you. You allow situations to develop without narrating every turn. You allow time to pass without making it an adversary. This allowance is not weakness. It is the confidence of someone who knows that what belongs to them cannot pass them by. When you embody that knowing, you stop chasing results and start drawing confirmations toward you. Small things begin to shift. A problem untangles without your intervention. A conversation unfolds better than you expected. An opening materializes from somewhere you never anticipated. These are not random occurrences. They are reflections of the settled certainty you have continued to hold. And the more you notice them, the more natural they become. You begin to realize that miracles were never truly scarce. You were simply too agitated to receive them, too contracted to notice them, too reactive to allow them through. But now, being unbothered has cleared the passage. You are no longer performing for life, trying to convince it of your worthiness. You no longer talk yourself into trusting that things will work out. You simply assume they do. And that assumption, running quietly beneath everything, governs the whole architecture of your experience. This is how an inner posture becomes a destiny. Not through grinding, not through struggle, but through sustained emotional bearing. And you hold that bearing even in private, especially in private, because what you feel when no one is watching determines what takes shape in the world that everyone can see. When your private silence is calm, your visible life becomes cooperative. So you continue, moment by moment, selecting composure, selecting trust, selecting inner quiet over mental turbulence. Not as a technique you apply, but as a way of inhabiting yourself. And life, which is always attentive, continues to respond. As this way of being settles more deeply into you, something subtle but profound becomes clear. Your inner world no longer rises and crashes in rhythm with external events. You experience emotions, of course, but they move through you rather than overtaking you. Thoughts arise, but you no longer automatically believe every one of them. Situations occur, but you no longer rush to decide whether they are good or catastrophic. The space between something happening and your response to it becomes the most important real estate you possess. Within that space, genuine choice is born. You choose not to unravel when answers are slow to arrive. You choose not to justify yourself when your silence says more. You choose not to defend your value when you already know it. These choices appear small in isolation, but they alter the entire architecture of your reality, because the world is not actually responding to what happens to you. It is responding to the meaning you assign to what happens. When you remain unbothered, you are quietly communicating to life. I trust this process because I trust myself. And trust functions like a magnet. Trust welcomes alignment. Trust removes the friction that keeps unseen forces from coordinating on your behalf. You begin to sense that matters are being handled even during your rest, that what you desire is moving toward you even while you sleep, that solutions are taking shape without requiring your mental micromanagement. This realization carries a profound kind of ease, not the ease of someone who does not care, but the ease of someone who is certain. You stop rehearsing collapse. You stop emotionally pre-visiting outcomes you would never choose. You understand that the imagination is generative, and you stop turning it against yourself. Instead, your imagination becomes settled, grounded, assured. You imagine from a place of having, not from a place of wanting, from stability rather than fear, from certainty rather than hope. And because imagination functions as the blueprint, reality cannot help but construct itself around the design you consistently return to. Being unbothered also transforms how you relate to the people around you. You no longer require their reactions as confirmation of your presence. You no longer need their agreement to feel secure in yourself. You listen more deeply, speak with more economy, and when you do speak, your words carry a weight that has nothing to do with volume. It comes from the calm behind them. People register this even when they cannot name it. Exchanges become easier. Conflict dissolves before it fully forms. Even when others are caught in emotional turbulence, your steadiness remains intact, and that steadiness becomes the prevailing tone. This is how genuine leadership forms, not through assertion or domination, but through the consistent regulation of one's own inner state. You come to understand that remaining unbothered is not an occasional strategy. It is a practice that continues until it becomes instinct. In the beginning, you may catch yourself reacting and gently redirect yourself back. Over time, the interval between reaction and awareness stretches, and awareness begins to take the lead. With awareness leading, miracles lose their quality of shock. They begin to feel expected. You trust timing instead of battling it. You stop forcing answers. You stop throwing your weight against doors that are meant to open without effort. When something does not move, you do not read it as resistance. You read it as redirection or as preparation for something that requires more than the current moment can contain. And because you are not emotionally destabilized, you can sense the difference. This clarity is among the greatest gifts of sustained composure. You stop confusing urgency with significance. You stop mistaking noise for progress. You understand that the most consequential shifts begin quietly, internally, long before they ever surface in visible form. So you continue living fully, meeting your responsibilities, engaging with people and with the world, but from a different center, a more stable one, a calmer one. You are present without being consumed, focused without being tense, involved without being entangled, and life responds to this equilibrium with precision. What you seek arrives when you have stopped hunting for it. Answers surface when you have stopped posing the same question on repeat. The person you needed to hear from reaches out just as you had released the attachment to hearing from them. Situations untangle themselves in configurations you could not have engineered, not because you tried harder, but because you stopped creating friction. The unbothered state removes resistance, and without resistance, movement is inherent. You begin to see that many of the obstacles you once encountered were not external walls, but reflections of your own inner tightness. Now that inner tightness has eased, the path ahead feels less like resistance and more like a natural unfolding. You wake with less noise in your mind. You move through the day without the constant overhead of commentary. You close your eyes at night without rehearsing old conversations or dreading tomorrow. Your nervous system begins to learn that it is safe to settle, because you are no longer treating uncertainty as an emergency. And from that settled state, genuine creation flows. You are no longer rushing miracles through. You are allowing them. You are no longer auditing for signs. You are recognizing alignment when it appears. You are no longer uncertain about your direction. You simply move in it. And step by step, moment by moment, the unbothered state continues to deepen, shaping your world from the inside out. As that depth becomes familiar, you begin to see how much energy was once lost to resistance. Exhaustion was rarely the result of too much action. It was the result of inner opposition, fighting what is, dreading what might be, replaying what has long since passed. Releasing that opposition gives you back yourself. Your energy returns. Your attention sharpens. Your presence becomes something people feel when you enter a room. Decisions stop feeling like burdens. You sense the right next step without forcing it into clarity. When something is not meant for you, there is no grief. When something is, there is no panic. A quiet certainty settles in that tells you nothing of real value requires desperation, and nothing true requires you to chase it. This certainty changes your relationship to time. You stop living in the projection of what might happen or the shadow of what already has. You inhabit the moment you are actually in, and from that inhabited present, reality responds most freely. The present moment is the only place where anything is ever actually created. Being unbothered roots you here, not scattered into imagined futures, not weighed down by accumulated pasts, just present, aware, steady, open. From that ground, you begin to notice possibilities that were always within reach, but invisible to a restless mind. You also begin to recognize that your previous reactions were teaching life how to treat you. Each time you pushed with urgency, life reflected urgency back. Each time you doubted, life handed you reasons to doubt. Each time you fractured emotionally, life reinforced the fracture. Now, as your reactions soften, life adjusts its response. It becomes gentler in its dealings with you. This does not mean difficulties disappear. It means difficulties no longer reach your center. You encounter them without absorbing them. You address them without being defined by them. You pass through them without carrying them forward. Because you do not internalize them, they do not persist. You begin to hold the understanding that whatever arises remains only as long as you give it emotional residency. This understanding is genuinely freeing. You stop holding tight to peak moments or bracing against valleys. You stay balanced, knowing that balance is the very thing that sustains forward motion. There is a maturity in this, a grounded confidence that does not announce itself and does not require an audience. You stop explaining your piece to people who are still accustomed to chaos. You let your composure communicate on its own. And it does. Others may be puzzled by how you remain steady when outcomes are still unclear, how you do not collapse the way they expect you might, how you carry on as though something is already settled. You do not try to persuade them. You simply remain as you are. You also notice something interesting happening with time. What once felt like standing still begins to accelerate. What once felt like obstruction begins to loosen. Not in dramatic fashion, but reliably, steadily, naturally. This is because time is pliable to assumption, and your assumption is no longer "I am waiting." It is "this is already in motion." So you continue operating from that understanding. No auditing, no forcing, no interrogating the process, just being. You understand that the unbothered state is not the death of desire. It is the end of desperation around desire. You still hold intentions, you still carry a vision, but they are held with open hands rather than clenched fists, with confidence rather than strain. And because they are held that way, they are free to arrive. You no longer confuse effort with effectiveness. You act when there is an inner signal to act, and you rest when rest is what is called for, trusting that both are equally productive when they arise from genuine alignment. You begin to feel the rhythm of life that was always present, but drowned in mental noise. Being unbothered tunes you into that rhythm. You begin to move with it instead of against it, and moving with it feels entirely natural. You understand now that miracles are not interruptions of reality. They are its natural output when someone maintains inner consistency long enough. They appear dramatic only to a mind that was long accustomed to resistance. To the calm mind, they feel like confirmation, like the logical arrival of something that was already underway. So you remain true to this state, not without error, but without abandonment. When old patterns surface, you notice them without harsh judgment and return to stillness. Each return cements the new foundation. Each moment of composure adds another layer to the identity you are building. And that identity, over time, becomes more vivid and more real than any passing circumstance. You trust it. You settle into it. You stop questioning whether it will hold, because it already feels like bedrock. Being unbothered is no longer something you reach toward during difficulty. It is the ground you stand on at all times. From that ground, perception itself transforms. You notice how a single calm choice leads naturally to the next, how one moment of restraint prevents an entire cascade of unnecessary complication, how remaining centered keeps a whole sequence of events from unraveling. You understand that staying unbothered is not about withdrawing from life, but about meeting it with your whole, undivided inner presence. You agree with life by trusting it. You cooperate with it by not opposing it at every turn. And life, receiving that cooperation, responds with a grace that accumulates over time. Even uncertainty begins to feel different, less like a threat and more like an open invitation, full of possibility rather than danger. You approach the unknown with curiosity rather than dread, with attention rather than alarm. So you continue breathing, moving, responding without tension. You allow emotions to pass through without constructing stories around them. You allow thoughts to arise without surrendering your authority to them. You allow events to develop without rushing their interpretation. This allowance becomes your deepest strength, and as it continues to deepen, reality continues to shape itself around the quiet certainty you carry and sustain. So carry this with you, not as inspiration that fades by morning, but as instruction that lives in you. The moment you stop being shaken by appearances, life begins to rearrange itself on your behalf. Not because you pled for it, not because you fought for it, but because you became still inside yourself. Being unbothered is not avoidance, it is mastery. It is the deliberate choice to trust your inner knowing above temporary evidence, to rest in certainty rather than pursue reassurance at every turn. When you stop offering your peace to circumstances, circumstances reorganize themselves around your peace. This is where effort dissolves into alignment. This is where waiting dissolves into knowing. This is where miracles stop being exceptional and become your natural inheritance. Stay calm, stay steady, stay inwardly complete, and watch how reality, with absolute faithfulness, reshapes itself to mirror the state you have chosen to live from.